Welcome to the Thought Balloons Podcast inaugural episode. I am your host, comics creator, Jeff Foulsham, and today I'm just going to tell you a little bit about myself and why I started this podcast. From here on out, the plan is to have a guest co-host every episode. We'll have a conversation about their lives and their interests, but I thought it would be a good way to open the podcast to do a short episode about your host. Can let you know who I am, can I figure out the format of this and sort of the kind of road that I'd like to go down throughout the podcast we call Thought Balloon. I guess the first thing to start off with us here is the name Thought Balloons. As I said, I am a comic book creator. Currently, I am working in indie comics. I have made 3 issues of a graphic novel series that I am currently finishing writing up the bulk of the rest of the series. I expect it to be somewhere around 25 plus issues. There is a lot of strong themes in it, so we're working through the scripting process of the rest of it right now. The first 3 issues, however, very easy story. Just an introduction, kind of let you know who the 2 main characters, like the main characters are, and introducing a 3rd character who will be part of the group. The comic is the Ozrin Tales. It is a fantasy adventure, similar to D&D. So eventually there will be a full group, a full 4-person group, but the first 3 issues is mostly introducing the 2 main characters. So in that respect, the title, Thought Balloons, is a reference to my work in comics, but it is also a reference to what I truly want to talk about with this podcast, and that is the thoughts that we have and why we think them. My goal is to find my friends and other people who are passionate about something and then discover together why we are passionate about the things that we are passionate about. That sentence made any sense. So for example, myself, I'll bare my soul a little bit here over the next 20 minutes, 30 minutes or so. For the example that I've been using when talking to people about this show and bringing them up to speed about what I want to talk about is why I'm personally interested in art and comic books specifically. So right off the bat, it all starts with my birth. Literally, as I was being born. I was born to a teenage couple in South Carolina, put up for adoption, and I was very, very fortunate, like extremely fortunate, something that I do not take for granted. It's extremely fortunate to be adopted by a pretty well-off family in Pennsylvania. We lived in a small town. My dad's he's now retired. He was an ear, nose, and throat doctor. So I have been under the impression that my whole life that I've escaped into a better life, and that is something that I do not take for granted. But there's something And I guess before I continue, there's a lot of people ask me this when they find out that I'm adopted. Yes, I've always known. To all of you out there asking, like, oh, how did you find out? I've just always known. It's never been a taboo subject in the family. I have two sisters. They are also adopted. So the three children of this family were all three of us were adopted. So it's never been a subject that was taboo or off limits or anything like that. Basically, as soon as you're conscious of being able to ask where do babies come from, all that kind of stuff, my parents just let it all out. They were just, you were adopted, right? So a lot of people ask me that. When did you find out? How did you find out? All that kind of stuff. Was it like a big, oh my God, kind of thing? No, it wasn't. It was just a fact of my life growing up, that I was adopted. My grandfather, my mother's father, also was also a physician. He actually worked in the hospital where I was born, and that's how I came to be with this family. But like I said, my interest in art, specifically comics, I can trace all the way back to that. Being adopted. When I was a kid and I knew that I was adopted, I was still curious, right? And it was something that my parents, I've found out, again, teenage parents that were in high school, very young, in my opinion, very young teenagers. I think my mother was my birth mother, I think she was 14. I think my birth father just turned 15. So we're talking like, what, 9th grade, 10th grade, something like that. Very, very young. Obviously, my life would have been completely different if I had, and their life too would have been completely different. But everybody's curious about their origin, right? And because there's like some things that my parents didn't want me to know until I was a little bit older, before I could, handle all that kind of stuff. Not just emotionally, but also just intellectually, right? Like, what does a 4-year-old or 5-year-old know of being a teenage parent, right? So there was always, like, on your 18th birthday, we'll tell you everything that you want to know, yada yada yada. But that left me in a strange place, right? A place of wanting to know, but having to wait. And I can remember that a lot of my playtime as a child, of course I had, video games and action figures and all that kind of stuff. You go over to friends' houses, play, cops and robbers, or, soldiers or something with sticks in their yard and stuff. Because this was before the days of the internet. The kids actually had to go outside every once in a while. Especially at my friend's Mike's house. His mom didn't really like us watching TV and playing, Nintendo all day, so she'd kick us out of the house for a few hours every time I was over there. And we'd play in his yard and things like that. But when I was on my own, and I wasn't being looked after by, friends of the family or whatever, I spent a lot of time at my dad's doctor's office. I didn't have like a babysitter or anything like that for after school. What I would do is my mom would come pick me up from school. I would come back to the office, do any homework I had in the office kitchen, and then they had like a little, when I was really young, they had a little Fisher-Price desk, and they'd sit me down with a piece of paper or a coloring book and some crayons or some markers or whatever, and just, tell me to keep myself occupied. And so, that was the nexus, right? That was the introduction into art. I think like a lot of kids, right, have that moment where their parents sit them down with a coloring book, or, they get stuck with a coloring book at school, and, all kids have that aspect. Once I got out of the coloring book phase and I was just sat in front of a blank piece of paper, I could very clearly remember that even if I was just drawing a single person, or you know or even just a page of characters that weren't necessarily interacting with each other, it was just a tableau of separate scenes, like hieroglyphics or cave paintings or something, where it's just this one big sheet of paper with a bunch of like unconnected drawings on it. The one thing I can always remember is that I was developing narratives in my own mind when doing this. The same thing when I would play with action figures. Yes, it may have been a Batman, action figure, or a Spider-Man, or a G.I. Joe or something, but I never really conceptualized those characters as, what they were, right? At least not the G.I. Joes. Maybe sometimes I would, conceptualize Spider-Man as Spider-Man, and the Silver Surfer toy that I had as the Silver Surfer, and Batman as Batman, or at least put them in heroic roles because I knew who those characters were. When I was a kid, I never really watched G.I. Joe, so I was a little bit before my time. But I had all these G.I. Joe action figures, and to me, they were just soldier characters, or like cool dudes in wetsuits. And I didn't really have a concept of like which individual character was what. And I remember really, really enjoying playing with action figures and drawing, because those were two places that I could insert my own narrative into something. And I can't speak for everybody who is an adopted person, but something for myself was always that sense of wondering, where do I come from? What would my life have been like had I been, not adopted, or had I been adopted by a different family, right? A lot of those questions, and not always consciously either, especially not when you're like a little kid. But looking back on that time in my life, I definitely think that there was some of that bubbling under the surface. A lot of what if, what if I was, like I said, what if I was raised by somebody else? What if I wasn't adopted at all and I was raised in South Carolina, to this, young family. And so there was always that question of building other lives and building narratives, and questioning, like, well, who are these people, in air quotes, like these people, like either the characters that I was drawing or the action figures that I was playing with. And it wasn't necessarily conscious self-insert. It wasn't like, at least not that I can remember ever thinking like, oh, I'm, the Batman, and I'm, swinging on my grappling hook, and I'm gonna, kick the Joker in the face, or whatever I was doing with the toys at the time. And it was, again, this is very similar in the sphere of drawing. I can never really remember, putting myself in there, but I definitely think that the whole aspect of driving to a story in the art, in the play of with action figures and stuff, was definitely part of this whole, who am I? Where did I come from? Who could I have been? Flash forward a little bit later, I'm in high school, and I've sort of taken a bit of a sidestep from the visual arts and moved into the performing arts. When I was leaving elementary school in 6th grade and heading into middle school in 7th grade, which I know some people leave their elementary schools, only go to 5th, and their middle schools are 6th to 7th. And I went to a Catholic elementary school that went to 6th grade. But anyway, when I was entering public school, that summer, I saw a rerun of Saturday Night Live that literally changed my life. It was a I want to say 75, 76. It was one of the first two seasons. I believe Candace Bergen was the host, but the musical guest was Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. And on that particular episode, Frank Zappa played a song called I'm the Slime. Now, I'm the Slime was a song that when it was performed, we actually got to see a camera angle from behind the crowd, behind the audience in the studio for Saturday Night Live. And you could see, like, on the monitors that they were watching, you could see the band performing and stuff. And when he gets to the chorus in that song, he sings, I'm the slime oozing out from your TV set. And when he says that line, literally, like, green foaming ooze, like, starts to, like a weird foamy texture to it. It, like, starts to drip out of the top of the monitors in the studio and run down the screens and, starts dripping off the bottoms. And that blew my mind. Like, it was a cool song. I enjoyed the music, but the production of that, like, blew my mind to a point where I rewound the tape 4 or 5 times. And yes, videotape. I used to tape Saturday Night Live when I was in 5th, 6th grade. I really got into, sketch comedy and things like that. But this is, like, again, before DVRs even. I saw this episode. I rewound it over and over again. Listened to that song on repeat for I don't even know how many times in a row. But eventually the spark of inspiration that had started with that song finally had, caught hold into a fire, and I ran upstairs. And it's the only time that I can remember. I'm sure there was other times, especially later in my teenage years. But it's the first time, definitely the first time, that I ever demanded something of my parents. And what I demanded of my parents was to learn how to play the guitar. And I think they took well to that demand from me, because it wasn't like I just want a new toy or, whatever, a new video game or something. It was something constructive, right? A lot of parents have their kids learn an instrument, piano, whatever. I think they were taking a bit of a back seat on that for me. My 2 older sisters, had to learn piano. Neither of them stuck with it. Neither of them are musicians now. I don't think that experience went over well for my sisters when they were being forced into it. So I think, not only just being the last one in line, but, I'm also younger by a significant margin. My 2 sisters are 8 and 10 years older than me. So, by the time I was heading into high school or middle school, my sisters were in college, and they were, they had much bigger problems that, my parents had to worry about, especially, like, through their high school years. When I was in elementary school and stuff, like, I think, 2 teenage girls within 2 years of each other going through high school and going into college, like, there's a lot of stuff that you have to worry about, especially for just, 2 parents it's, I think there's a lot of things that I got away with. I didn't really have to do a lot of sports. I didn't really have to do a lot of, extracurriculars in general. And a lot of the stuff that I did do was stuff that I was interested in, at least at the beginning. I do think they made me play soccer, and I wasn't a big fan of soccer. But after that, it was pretty much just stuff that, either my friends were interested in and I wanted to be a part of it too because my friends were, into it, or, there was, like, a spark of inspiration somewhere along the line that usually faded very quickly when it came to things like sports. I can remember in elementary school, um, a friend of mine, Kyle, and even a friend, Gabe, who became the bassist in my band later on, when we were in high school. They were into like basketball and stuff, and so I wanted to play basketball. Got into basketball, hated playing basketball. Same thing with hockey. My friend Mike, super into hockey. You know, we went to see a game. I don't remember. I think Mike was there. I know my oldest sister was there. I think my dad took us to Philadelphia to see the Flyers play. I know my older sister really liked the Flyers. I think my uncle came with us. My dad's sister and her husband live in Philly. Well, greater Philly area. And I think my Uncle Ray was with us. At any rate, we went there. We were like maybe 5-6 rows away from the glass, and I saw Eric Lindros get into a fight, like almost right in front. It wasn't directly in front of us, but it might as well have been to my kid brain, right? And I thought that was like the coolest thing ever. And Mike's dad, my buddy Mike, his father was super into hockey. Followed the Wilkes-Barre Penguins, like minor. I think it's like a minor league team or something, amateur. Anyway, so we got to see a lot of like Wilkes-Barre Penguins, not Pittsburgh Penguins. Wilkes-Barre Penguins. See a lot of those games, and all that stuff. And then when we got old enough, we signed up for hockey, and I found out that I wasn't going to be the one starting and winning fights all the time. I found out that other people can start fights and other people can slam you into the boards, and I very quickly realized that I am not the main character in a movie, and that getting punched hurts. So quickly dropped out of hockey. But as I was saying, like, I think when I wanted to learn guitar and I was like, hey, like, get me a guitar. I want to learn how to play the guitar. I think my parents were a lot more amenable to that because, they were creative. There's like whatever studies or whatever that show like kids who learn to play an instrument are a lot better in other aspects in their life, yada, yada, yada. And so I think that even by my recollection, looking back on it, definitely not the way you should probably go about, asking your parents for something is like, it's going, hey, Ma, get me a guitar. It's probably not the best way to ask. But I'm very glad that they did. Anyway, that all leads back into narrative, because once I started writing music, even though I was shifting away from those long hours of just drawing and play acting in my head with, the cartoons and things that I was drawing, and things like that, like after school, spending just hours and hours and hours doing that. Even in my music, I wasn't just writing, in my opinion, I wasn't just writing, simple little pop songs, right? It wasn't just, like, ooh, 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 she loves me, ooh, 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 I love her, repeat, right? There's a lot of songs out there in the pop music genre that I don't, at this point in my life, I realize what their function is, and their function is to make people dance. It's not music meant to be distilled into the philosophical underpinnings of the lyrics, right? It's all about the beat and to get you moving. And, that's what most pop music is about, and that's great. I always gravitated more to, artists like Frank Zappa and Modest Mouse and, The Doors and groups like that, whose lyrical content is something that you need to dig into. And again, with my constant questioning of, who am I? Where did I come from? Constantly thinking about, alternate, characters, not just, who I might be, but just in general, just, characters and situations and how people interact and all that kind of stuff. My music took a very narrative, you know, bend, right? So like I can remember very vividly, when I was, sitting in my basement, writing down the tablature of the guitar parts that I was coming up with, constantly thinking about like what the title could be and what, once I named a song or something, I would think about like, okay, what's the narrative here for this title, or vice versa. I would start, in class or something, when I wasn't taking notes, because who takes notes? Um, when I wasn't paying attention in school, and I was writing what was basically poetry at the time, because I didn't have my guitar with me, but I was just writing these, groups of rhyming couplets, and I was always, trying to figure out, okay, what's the story here? What am I trying to say with this? And whether I was saying it poetically in verse that might make you think something, or even if it was more a straightforward song, there was always a message and an underpinning message or story that I was trying to impart with my music. And that is something then to move on to the next phase of my life. So in elementary school, it was all about drawing and, storytelling through action figures and stuff like that. Moving into middle school, high school, I got into music. I was still doing art every single time I was able to take an art class in high school, middle school. I took the chance to do that because I still really liked drawing. I was even drawing like 4-panel comics in certain classes. There was a girl who I liked, and she had just a little bit of a twisted sense of humor, just like me. Kind of a dark, and we're talking like middle school, early high school here, and looking back, I think we were both nihilists at this point. It was just very like strange, dark comedy, strange slapstick stuff of like little cute things, getting completely mangled, like we're talking like cartoon violence, right? But she really liked this, and I was trying to impress her and stuff. So like, I was still doing art, but it wasn't like the main focus, right? And I got to 11th grade, 12th grade, somewhere around there, whenever you start looking for colleges and things like that. And I can remember my art teacher, Joe Waltz, who tried to convince me that I should go to school for art. He said that I had a lot of potential. He said I could probably do something in the arts. And in my brazen, in my brazen high school, teenage know-it-all kind of thing, I was like, yeah, I like art and I'm pretty good at it, but like, it's something that I do for fun. This is like a hobby. It like relaxes me and all that kind of stuff. And I'm afraid to do it as a career because I don't want it to become a job and something that I hate. And on one hand, I wish that he had been a little bit more stern with me, or a little bit more like, I wish he pushed the envelope a little bit more on it. But I was also a pretty headstrong kid. When I get my ideas solidified on something, like, it's pretty hard to dissuade me. I've always been fairly strong-willed. I feel like I'm a really nice guy and I make a lot of allowances for other people. But in those moments when I have made my mind up, I've made my mind up. And I think he probably, having dealt with me over 4 years of high school, probably understood that, and maybe that's why he let it go. But at any rate, I was like, I'm applied to music school. Well, turns out To get into the music school, you needed to know how to play the piano and you needed to know how to read sheet music. Two things that I did not know how to do. I tried to learn. I got lessons from a very well acclaimed pianist who lived in our area. She moved there. She was married to a college professor. They had just moved into town from elsewhere, and she had been, played all sorts of different actual she was like a legit pianist. But she was also super duper strict, and I did not mesh well with this person at all. It was one of these she's used to teaching people in a manner of, you do exactly as I say, you never question my authority, and I will teach you how to be a concert classical pianist. And again, I was just not the kind of person, and I to an extent I'm getting over this, but it's still definitely a major character flaw of mine. I am not the kind of person who is just able to have an unquestioning allegiance to anyone or anything. I always have to question things, and I feel like most of the time you can reach a nice middle ground with people. In this particular case, I could not reach a nice middle ground with this piano teacher. She wanted me to learn, work all my exercises in the Hanon book. She gave me a book of classical music that she wanted me to practice. That was all she wanted me to do. And looking back, I can understand where she's coming from. I didn't know her all that well. She didn't know me all that well. She probably had a lot of experience with other kids asking for the same kind of leeway, and she gave it to them, and they, kind of burned her on it. But in my head, it was something where I was having trouble conceptualizing the things that she was teaching me, because I had no interest in the music that she was trying to make me learn. And so I had gotten a book of music by Ben Folds. I believe it was the music to the album Whatever and Ever Amen. I think it's the album that has Brick on it, and a couple other really cool songs. One Angry Dwarf and 200 Solemn Faces. Anyway, so I brought her this book, and I asked, hey, can we, at the end of our lessons, the last 10 minutes, 15 minutes or something, can you help me to learn some of these songs too? It wasn't like I was asking, hey, can we forget everything you're trying to teach me, just teach me this music? It was can you help me decipher and understand this stuff? And to her credit, what she said is true, but what she said wasn't something that helps me, because I'm the kind of person that needs to be interested in what I'm learning about. And what she said was, if you follow my instructions, you will be able to play what's in that book without my help. And that's true. If I had stuck with it, if I had knuckled down and done what she said, did my Hanon exercises, and learned to play these classical songs, I would have been able to read music, and I would have been able to play the piano, and I would have been able to play all the Ben Folds songs that I wanted. But again, there is that sort of, I need to be interested in something, and if there is no reward for me along the way, then it makes it very, very difficult to maintain focus, to maintain that inspiration and the drive to do something. So with music out of the way, I left the piano teacher. I didn't learn the piano. I gave up on the quest to go to music school, and instead I was faced with, well, what now? Um, and I was like, well, I like telling stories. I didn't want to do art, and like I knew I was telling stories in my music. Like that was always the goal. Like I was very conscious of that then. So when I didn't, you know, get when I didn't get the skills to go into the music program that I wanted to, I instead applied for film school. My eye towards television, specifically, you know, writing and working on sitcoms and things like that. I thought it would be really fun. Maybe, you know, try to get to SNL, something along those lines. And I got accepted into film school, so I was like, awesome. I get, you know, to go to film school. We're gonna learn how to make movies, you know, yada yada yada, tell stories. Like I was feeling at that time very comfortable, very interested in that. Until, you know, life happens. I got to college, you know, moved away from home for like the first time. And the pressures of school and the accruing loneliness. You have to remember, like, my age group, we were the first people to like kind of grow up on cell phones, kind of. Like we like the texting and all that stuff was happening in middle school, high school for me. You know, 8th, 9th grade, somewhere around there is when I remember people getting phones, and it was, you know, like it was the, you know, tap number 2 twice to get a B, right? Like that kind of texting. And people started texting each other back and forth, right? All that kind of stuff. And when I got to college, there was this major sense of loneliness that it's hard to kind of describe. But I'm sure a lot of people who've been there kind of understand that loneliness. You're in a new place, you don't really know anybody. Now for me, my freshman year, I did not go into a dorm. You know, I had a lot of self-confidence issues, things like that. My parents took pity on me. They didn't make me go into a place where there was like communal bathrooms and showers and things like that. So I was able to get an apartment just off campus. It was literally like across the street from campus. But I was in an apartment. You know, it's just I had 2 roommates in my apartment. You know, whatever. But they were both a year older than me, and not in the same program as me. You know, I was a communications major. I forget what my roommate John was, his major. He had his own bedroom. He had been in that apartment the year before, and so he was able to grab just a single room to himself. And then I had to share a room with a guy named Rick, who was a business major. I do remember that John was ROTC, military. I think he was going to go into the army, all that kind of stuff. Very, very different from myself. But I got along well with Rick anyway. But still, he wasn't like in any of my classes or anything. And one of the things that I can remember feeling very lonely about was the people in my classes. A lot of them did live in the dorms. And, you know, it would come to be Thursday, you know, Friday during class, and we would try to like make some plans for the weekend or something. And it was a sort of repetitive cycle of everybody not really knowing what they were going to do all over the weekend. And I was like, well, if we're not going to do anything, then, you know, I'm going to go home, you know, restock the wallet from the parents. And, you know, do the laundry and all that kind of stuff. You know, maybe go do some grocery shopping or something. And then, you know, I'd be back on the Monday. And then, of course, that Monday, all of my friends who said they weren't doing everything over the weekend would talk about all these parties and stuff that they had gone to. And eventually, during my freshman year, I was still in a band, with some of the guys from home, but I had also found another guitar player, at school, and he was in my band, so I know he didn't have a problem with me, right? And what he had told me was, like, when I confronted him about this, I was like, hey man, like, what's going on here? Like, multiple weekends, I ask, like, hey, are we gonna do anything over the weekend? Because I'll stay and we'll hang out or whatever. I'll do, I got a roll of quarters. I'll do laundry in the, the laundry room of my building or whatever. And, like, we can get into some shit. But, like, every weekend you're like, yeah, we're not really doing anything. I go home, come back on a Monday, and you're telling me all these cool stories about these, like, parties you went to. And for him, he was like, well, we didn't plan on doing anything. It's just like, we're hanging out in the dorms and we see a bunch of people walk by the room looking like they're about to go to a party. And, Tom steps out to the room and he's like, hey, just steps out into the hall and he's like, hey, what are you guys doing? Where are you guys going? And they're like, oh, we're going to go up the hill to this party. And so, we throw on some, fancy duds and we head up the hill and, go to a party. And so it was never anything that they ever planned. It was just something that kind of happens and they get swept up in it for, living where they live. But for me, all of my friends not living in my building, it was something where, like, I was sort of missing out on it and I wasn't getting included in those things. So it was like very lonely experience. And I don't think that's like what triggered my depression. I think it was always there to some extent. Growing up, I was very close to my maternal grandfather growing up, and when I was heading into 8th grade, it was the summer before 8th grade. He was killed in a car accident, and I think, that's probably like where it starts to kick in a lot for me. But definitely when I got to college, like, it started to affect my life. So much to the point where, I started self-medicating with marijuana and I was, ditching class. My roommate, Rick, for as much as I love him, he's a very good guy, had some bad advice, which was, oh, the teachers, they work for you. You're paying to be here. If you don't want to go to a class, then you shouldn't have to go to a class. And I kind of took that to heart. So over the course of 3 years, my grades kept getting worse and worse. My depression kept getting worse and worse. I still went to my film-based classes, my communications courses, because that was stuff that I was interested in. And I can remember 2 things that ultimately led to me getting into comics. The first was I took a class about script writing and how to turn a script into a movie, but we didn't actually make a movie, right? So the first part of the course was, writing a bunch of like test scripts and stuff. And then there was a section in there where we took a lot of scripts and we broke those down into storyboards. So those of you out there listening who don't really know what a storyboard is, the storyboard is where you take the script and you draw a series of rectangles in the same aspect ratio that you're going to be filming. And you literally draw the scene. Like, if, character A is going to be standing on the left, character B is going to be standing on the right, you draw their characters, one on the left, one on the right. And then if the next shot is a close-up of character A talking, so you draw him left justified looking to the right, at where we know character B is. Then you have the reverse shot, of character B right justified looking to the left. And it was just a sequential art assignment of drawing every single shot in the script. There's like notation and stuff that you do. Like, various ways that you draw arrows to make sure like the director and people know, or the camera operators know like where to pan, zoom in, zoom out, like that kind of thing. But you're basically taking a script and you're breaking it down into sequential still images. It's like drawing a comic book, except you don't put dialogue in the actual panel. You write it either to the side or underneath of the frame if there's dialogue. And you don't finish it, and it's all the same aspect ratio, right? In a comic book, you might have a one tall skinny panel next to, a couple short but wide panels, right? And you get to play around with that kind of stuff. But in screen, storyboards, every panel, as it were, is the same size because you're obviously filming it for a set screen size. So that was something that kind of reignited my interest in art, drawing and the visual arts. And then the second thing, not so positive, was the following semester. And this is the last semester that I was in school before I dropped out due to various things like really shitty grades and not attending classes. This class that I'd taken, fall semester was script writing and how to get from script to screen. And then the second part of that course in the spring was taking those scripts and storyboards, maybe not necessarily the ones that we had done, but we take the script and storyboard and actually make movies and various things, right? With them. And the whole semester I was paired with one group. It wasn't like there was like 4 or 5 projects that we had to do, 4 or 5 like short films that we had to make. And it wasn't like every single time you like broke up, went off with somebody else. Instead, it was the whole semester you were stuck with the same people. And every single project you would rotate to a new position in the order. So like maybe the first time you're on sound and you're holding the boom mic, and then the next time you might be the editor who cuts up the footage and puts it into the correct order. And then the next time you might be the director, the writer-director, right? Next time you'll be the camera operator and all that kind of stuff. So like you'd work your way through it. And, to their credit, they all had goals that all as important to them as my goals were to me. But our goals and our artistic sensibilities did not align. I was in a branch campus doing the like preliminary classes before heading up to the main Penn State campus where I was going to actually get to join the specific film and television section, right? So I was specifically film and television, and it was just generic communications, and I was lumped in with everybody else who wanted to do like sports journalism, just journalism in general, radio, all the others, just generic communications. And the people that I had gotten stuck with, for whatever reason, all of them wanted to be in journalism, which is great. I don't really remember who they were. I wasn't really good friends with them, so I don't know their backstories or whatever, but hey, world needs like good journalists, right? But oh boy, do we ever with. Anyway, I don't want to get off on a tangent about media, but needless to say, all of the projects that they wrote and directed, most of them were news packages because that's what they wanted to do, right? And as my job as editor, when I had to do it, I edited their news package. And when I was the film, camera operator, I shot what they wanted me to shoot. The problem came when it was my turn to be the director. I didn't know how many times I would get to be behind the camera telling other people what to shoot, how many times that I'd get to make my own short films. And so the weird person in me came out in full force, and I was like, well, this is going to be the time when I get to make a weird experimental film that's almost like a rite of passage for all, college filmmakers, right? Just full of symbolism and weird angles and strange shots, and just, for me, it was almost just like an exercise in weirdness for weirdness sake. Well, when I saw the final edit, it was a completely different thing. They had not only had the camera operator not gotten the exact shots that I wanted to get, the editor took out a lot of the special effects that I wanted them to do in the edit. They chose specific takes and shots and stuff that I wasn't like super into. And now I know in the actual film world or whatever, directors get to like look at dailies, and like if the editor is not doing it properly, they say, hey, fucking do it right. But for whatever reason, that's not how this class was structured, and it broke me. Like, it broke me in a way that, like, I was on the edge of depression like I hadn't known before. And after that experience, I was just plummeting, Now, before anybody gets like super concerned, there's no self-harm or anything like that. But I definitely, turned to drugs and alcohol a lot more. Not just smoking weed anymore, things like that. One of my acquaintances, was able to get some painkillers and things, so there was some experimenting there, and I thank all the forces of the universe that downers and painkillers was not my scene, because that could have been a terrible, terrible thing. That life path could have been really, really shitty, to get hooked on like OxyContin and things like that. But I did seek refuge in alcohol and other, self-medications. For a time, I stopped going to a lot of my classes, even my communications and film classes at that point. And at the end of the semester, I had less than a 1.0 GPA for that semester. It brought my whole GPA cumulative down below whatever the threshold was for academic probation. So I was put on academic probation, and they were like, you've got one semester, to bring your shit up to, par. Otherwise, we're going to expel you. And I was just like, well, you can't fire me if I quit. And so I dropped out of school. Summer of 2010. Spring semester 2010. Drop out of school. After 2.5, almost 3 years in school. And so I didn't go back in the fall. I got a job with the census. After working the census, my dad took pity on me. He gave me a job at his doctor's office. It was doing data entry. He was swapping from paper files to electronic files. This was a lot of just, putting in names, addresses, that kind of shit into the computer program. While doing that, I was answering phones, taking patients back to their rooms, yada, yada, yada. Even at one point learned how to give hearing tests, which I'm not confident I'd be able to do anymore. But at one point, I was taught by the audiologist that worked at his office how to do hearing tests, which freed her up to do more hearing aid maintenance and see more patients and stuff. So, there was that kind of like, just an extra set of hands, right? Um, a couple years go by, and in my downtime at the office between, rounds of data entry and things like that, I fell back into old habits. This was the same place that I grew up drawing when I was a kid. This is in the same exact place, same office. My dad's practice hadn't moved at all, and environment often dictates behavior, and so I started to sketch more and more frequently. There was a stack of, we had this old dot matrix printer, one of those really, really old printers where you feed the paper up from below, and there's like this perforation on either side with like little holes in it so that the gear, like the spoked wheels on the side of the printer, can feed the paper through. Like, this is like old school technology here stuff, right? And for whatever reason, anytime you printed from that printer, it would always feed an entire blank sheet of paper before it started printing anything. And so oftentimes, the things that got printed on there needed like a cover sheet anyway. So a lot of the times when it was finished, they would just write on that piece of paper like what that packet is, whether it was that month's expense reports or whatever. But maybe 45% of the time, that piece of paper would just get ripped off and set on a stack right next to the printer on the desk that I worked on. So there was this ever-growing stack of blank paper that couldn't be used for anything. It's not like you can feed that back into the printer because it's just a single sheet. It's not connected to the ream of paper, right? So they rip that sheet of paper off and just sits there. And eventually I was just like, hey, like, what is this? And they're like, I don't just we recycle it every once in a while. I was like, well, if it's just going to be recycled, and, I'm sitting here for 10, 15 minutes at a time, waiting for, phone calls and stuff. Can I just sketch on it? And I think that was something where, I had the benefit of, I was working for my dad, right? So eventually, he was the boss, right? And he was like, yeah, whatever, just, don't. Basically what he wanted out of me was, as long as I got the job done when I had something to do, he really didn't care what I was doing, as long as I wasn't sitting there on my phone, because the patients could see into the business office. So he didn't want me just sitting on my phone looking like I wasn't doing anything. But he had the notion that, well, if he's just using like paper and he's writing on it, no one can really know whether he's drawing something or if he's writing something, right? So he's like, at least it looks like he's working. I think is probably what he was thinking. At any rate, it got me back into art. And when it came time, after a few years of working there, my dad started like transitioning into, well, hey, I'm old and I'm going to retire. And that was a process. It took a few years. But part of that process was him selling the practice to the group that runs our local hospital. And when that happened, the people who were buying the practice did an inventory of the people working there, which included me. And they were like, oh, okay, so you've been doing, data entry, answering phones, taking patients back, and we see where you've been doing hearing tests. Now, there's, as far as I'm aware, there's no law or anything in Pennsylvania that says you have to be certified to give a hearing test. But they wanted me, like, if I was going to work for this company that oversaw the local hospital and a few other doctors' private practices and things like that. They wanted me to like actually go to school and get a degree in some sort of medical adjacent thing. Um, and they had offered to pay for it and all that kind of stuff. And for me, it was like, well, I never really wanted to work this office job anyway. If I'm going to do this, if I'm going to go back to school, I might as well go back to school for something that I actually enjoy. And it was winter of 2013, 2012 into 2013. And I sat down and really meditated on what I wanted to do. And it dawned on me for the first time, I think. Maybe not the first time, but definitely it was the most significant time that I realized that the entire time I was creating, I was telling stories. Like I mentioned earlier, when I was writing music, I knew I was writing music with a story behind it, with a message behind it. And when I was going into film school, I was like, oh, I'd like to tell stories. Maybe I can get into like TV and things like that. But it wasn't something where I was like, I feel like in both of those things, it was more of me wanting to entertain people. I wanted to make other people laugh or whatever, or have a good time. And it was my way of doing that. It was just naturally something like, I felt like I should be telling stories through my music or whatever. That there should be some kind of narrative to it. What I think that difference was, that winter 2012 into 2013. I think the difference there was I finally put all the pieces together for the first time in my conscious mind and not my subconscious. And that was that everything that I had done creatively, from the time that I was a kid drawing in my dad's office and playing with action figures, through middle school doing music, up to my first time in college doing film, even back when I was still, again, back in the office doing doodles, I realized like everything had a narrative to it. And I really liked drawing. When I was in film school, one of my good friends there, who was a history major, he got me like into comics. Like I had a few comics here and there growing up. But it was always a thing where my parents were like, well, if you're gonna read, you better read a book. If we're, we didn't have, for the longest time, when I was growing up, like I said, I live in a very small town. Very small, like we have a college here, but everything around us in central PA is farmland. Like our movie theater, for example, in the town that I had one screen until I was in high school. In the early 2000s. It was a one screen theater. If you wanted to go to like a big movie theater, you have to travel like 40 minutes to a neighboring city to go to like a multi-screen place. And it was the same thing for comics. I can remember really, really early on in my life, I was like 5 or 6 years old. I think the 2 or 3 comics that I bought in my town, in a storefront that later on became a music store, that I took lessons at. That comic book shop went out of business, and I'm pretty sure that the comics that I bought here in town were probably during their going out of business sale. And so my parents, when I wanted to like read more comics, like they were always like, well, if we're going to be driving 45 minutes to go to a comic book store, we might as well just go to the Barnes and Noble instead and get you an actual book. So it was always this thing of, we're not going to spend the time, the gas money to go get you silly picture books when I was growing up. But once I was in, film school and I was doing whatever the hell I wanted to do as an independent young adult, I got into comic books in a bad way. I started reading The Walking Dead. Chew came out, and I was reading Chew, and it was amazing. To this day, this is my favorite graphic novel. Brilliant story by John Layman and illustrated by Rob Guillory. I started getting into, just in a bad way, I was getting into Image comics. Just I loved Image. Super hardcore. I was read a lot of stuff by that publisher. Anyway, move forward now. I've out of school, dropped out of a job because I didn't want to go to school to medical, like, office management or whatever the hell they wanted me to do. And I realized that in comics I can draw, which I like to do. I can tell stories, which is something that I've always felt compelled to do. And I didn't have to work with other people who were going to destroy my creative vision. It would take me longer, and it would be a lot more effort. But at the end of the day, I would be able to do it all by myself, right? There are guys out there like Frank Miller who write and draw their own books. And have the, the creative control, or at least in my head at that point, that's how it worked, right? Now I'm sure, now I'm getting more into the industry and things like that, there are editors and things like that you're probably gonna have to work with, and Frank Miller probably still had to work with an editor when he was doing Sin City and 300 and other stories of his own design. Definitely when he was writing The Dark Knight, and like working for DC, like of course he had to work with editors there. But he still had pretty much free reign over the creative process, right? Which to me was very tantalizing. Something that I really, really wanted to do. And so it just made sense to me at that point, something where I kicked myself real hard and I was like, Joe Waltz was right. My art teacher in high school was right. I should have just gone to art school right out of high school, and, all of this could have been avoided. But I have since mostly 89%. I have mostly forgiven myself for that. Because I do see now, as I work in comics, I do see how just how important the film aspect of my learning really was. You have comics is basically movies, but you just don't film it. It's like doing every part of making a movie, except when you draw the storyboard, you polish the art a little bit more, and you put word balloons in the panels, and your panels don't have to be all the same aspect ratio. But basically, comics is movies. You just don't film it at the end of the day. And when I realized that, it was like the puzzle pieces just all connected. And so I enrolled in school. Now I made a deal with my folks. They were like, well, the last time you went to school didn't work out too well, so we want you to move home so we can keep an eye on you and make sure you actually go to your classes. And, we'll, help you, financially and stuff like that. But if you're going to do this, like, we want you to live here at the house. And that way we can make sure that, you're not going to fuck it all up again. Which I appreciated, and I jumped at the chance, right? Extremely fortunate. Just extremely, extremely fortunate. I got out of college, with like next to no debt. And I can't even begin to put into words just how fortunate that makes me in all respects. Just like, I've worked on empathy over the last 5 years. I'm sure I'll mention this in the future, because I'm not too cagey about this, but it's not something that, anyway. I used to be a pretty selfish person when I was doing my music stuff. I idolized people, like I said, like Jim Morrison, right? People who didn't make it out of their 20s. And so now that I'm in my early 30s, and I realized that, hey, this is gonna last, maybe my life's gonna last a little bit longer than 27. Over the past 5 years or so, I've really taken this, road of empathy. So when it comes to all of the people out there under crippling debt because they've gone to college, that is something I am fully aware of, and I feel for all of you out there. And not a day goes by that I am not appreciative for the circumstances that I have been granted across my whole life. Whether it's white privilege or whatever, I fully recognize that I, as an individual, have had so much in the way of a safety net that it's almost unthinkable in the world that we live in today. But I also think that without that safety net, I may not be here either. And not just here doing this podcast and doing I literally may not have survived. I did mention earlier, there's never been a point where I've ever tried self-harm. But there was a pretty dark period in there where contemplating it certainly came up. So, had my life gone a different way, who knows? It's not something, that particular what if is definitely not one that I like to entertain and give too much bandwidth in my brain. At any rate, comics is the culmination of everything that I had been working towards creatively. It allows me to tell stories. I was never good at, in school, I was never good at doing one-off paintings, I was okay at portraiture and things like that, and I could do a still life, but everything looked, I don't want to say dead, but it looked dead, flat, uninteresting, because it wasn't it wasn't really where my passions lied, but it was also just something that I didn't know how to conceptualize properly. I have friends who, throughout my, years in art school, I have a lot of friends who just really nail being a painter or, an illustrator that does, chalk drawings or, whatever. Man, did they nail it, and they hit it out of the park. I never felt like I did a good job at making a painting. I never felt satisfied. I never felt inspired by that. I never really felt like I knew what I was doing in that respect. But comic books, that gives me more space to play in. Having a narrative and depicting that narrative in pictures imparts a very clear and concrete purpose to every single thing that I'm drawing in every panel on every page. So while, I was trained in everything from watercolors to oil to acrylic, gouache, charcoal, pastels of both chalk and oil pastels, graphite, inking traditionally, digital art, all the works, every 2D thing that you can think of, printmaking, both, linoleum cuts, acid etching, wood block like, I even had made paper at one point in school, like, blending up the pulp and putting the, PVA in the water and making actual just paper. I did all of it, every single part of it. But nothing really captures me the way sequential art does. And I think, again, it all comes back to, being adopted. It comes back to that, questioning of, who could I have been, what my life may have been like, and telling those narratives, telling stories in comics, is something really cathartic, and I think really, really interesting for me, because I've always had those thoughts, running in the back of my head. It's something like that my comic, The Ozrin Tales, deals with on a certain level. I think I may have mentioned this at the beginning, or maybe it was in a different take when I tried to start this earlier. I I write a medieval fantasy sort of Dungeons and Dragons-y sort of thing, with this character that I created, and I'll probably come off as sounding like a hipster, like, oh, I did this before it was cool, whatever, I don't fucking care. My whole creative life has been things of me independently creating stuff and then finding out somebody else did it, or someone else did it very soon after, I had the idea. But I will say, just because it's a super easy way to explain it to a lot of people out there who may be listening, the main character in my comic book is this green-haired gnome named Fonkin, who has portal abilities. We can travel to various universes and things like that. He was originally a wizard. There's reasons why he doesn't cast magic himself anymore, but you'll have to read the graphic novel to find those out. But he's a very Rick-esque character from Rick and Morty, right? Maybe not so much, nihilistic and cynical and, suicidal, but, he can hop from different versions of, the Ozrin world to, from whatever, right? I explore all these different universes, and the reason why I put that in there is because I've always liked exploring the alternatives to what could be happening. There's a comic that I read from the start of its series, was Black Science, which again is a multiversal look, in a comic of people who can jump between multiverses. Chrononauts is another. It's a short 4 or 6 issue. The original one. There's a sequel. But Chrononauts is another thing. That one is about people who travel through time. And traveling through time is basically like stepping into an alternate universe, right? You're leaving where is comfortable and what you know into something that is completely different. It may still be the same planet, but it's not the planet that right? It's very much like traveling through. dimensions and things like that. And also just like in Dungeons and Dragons in general, right? You have like the material plane, but then you have all the elemental plane, like the plane of fire that's all like burning fields and lava flows and things like that. You know, the plane of water, which is just an endless sea, you know, all that kind of stuff. But then you have like the outer planes of the various places that, you know, are evolved from our myths of the afterlife here on Earth. Like there's, you know, Nirvana, I think, is a plane, and Pandemonium is one. Purgatory, I think, is one. What's the? I think Valhalla might be like, or a Valhalla like. So you have all these like different planes. And you can go to all these different places, and you're like leaving your own world behind, and that's always something that's fascinating. And it's something that is going to play. It plays a minor role in the first 3 issues that I've done so far. It's going to play a major role, right, in the whole comic book itself, this whole graphic novel. Even though we're focusing on one version of Osrin, the portal stuff and moving through dimensions is definitely like a big theme in the comic. You know, and it's one of those things, like, you know, to bring it all back around and kind of wrap this up, because I've been talking now for way longer than I thought I would. You know, it all comes back to that thing. Like I said, it all starts at my birth and being adopted and questioning where I came from and who I could have been. So yeah, that's sort of me kind of digesting everything and why I feel like I am passionate about the things that I am passionate about. You know, there's a lot of stuff I think that happens in a lot of our lives that lead us to be the people that we become. I know it's nature versus not. I know it's not nature versus nurture, but it's nature and nurture all at the same time. But I definitely feel like we are the sum of our experiences, and there are certain experiences that we have that mold us more than others. For me, it was the circumstances of my birth. I'm sure there are people out there that don't even give a second thought to that. But instead, there are things that maybe happened to them at another point in their life, or has yet to happen to them, that will shape how they live the rest of their life. For me, it took 23 years to figure it out. You know, and we're almost a decade later. We're 8 years later now, and I feel just as strongly about doing comics and telling stories in a visual medium than I feel just as strongly now as I did back in 2013 when I decided to go back to school for art to do this. And I think that's a good sign, you know. It's been almost a whole decade, and my confidence and my interest has been unwavering this entire time. But wow, we're coming up to a whole hour and a half here. I did not expect this to go that long. I didn't even touch on the D&D stuff all that much, you know, but again, storytelling, alternate universes. I didn't touch on how I was in theater in high school, which, you know, affected why I wanted to go into film. You know, I was an actor and you know, stuff like that in the plays and musicals in high school. Again, comes back to the what is possible, who I could have been, all that kind of stuff. But I think you guys have a relatively good idea about my psyche and my psychosis. I don't know. Probably not that word. But yeah, I think I hope whoever has listened to this, I hope you have enjoyed it. Please leave a comment if you're able to comment on whatever platform you're listening to this on. If you can't comment, or even if you can, please, like it, or, whatever, subscribe to the podcast, follow the podcast. I'm using Anchor, to put this out on the internet, so I'm not exactly sure, where it all goes. I think it'll be on Spotify and maybe everywhere podcasts are available. Maybe? I'm not sure. I haven't uploaded. This is the first thing I've recorded. So I don't know, but we're gonna put this up sometime soon. Yeah. Thank you all for watching. Watching, Jesus. You can tell I'm not used to this podcast sign off thing yet. Thank you all for listening to this podcast and maybe watching. I might do some art and time lapse it and put it into the thing and maybe put it up on my YouTube channel or something, but we'll have to see. I don't know. I don't really have any plans for that right now, specifically what I might be doing in that realm. But yeah, thank you for consuming this content in whatever way you have consumed it. Please like it, follow it, all that kind of stuff. Leave a review, share it with your friends. The next episode, we will be talking to a good friend of mine. His name is Mr. Abstracto, as he goes by on the internet. He is a fellow artist, but he is also who I think someone who would be a really good first guest, as he is also currently getting his degree in psychology. So I think he provides a very unique perspective for this podcast, right? It is about the thoughts that we have and why we think them, what we're passionate about and why we're passionate about it. As we can see, a very kind of introspective sort of thing. It's something where it's probably not very humble to say, but I do feel like I am a rather introspective person who kind of knows a little bit about why I do the things that I do. I am sure I am missing a lot, and were I to, go to therapy, I'm sure that they would crack me like an egg and tell me I don't know jack shit about anything about my life. But I attempt to be rather introspective, and I do try and understand why I am the way that I am. And like I said, I think Brandon is Mr. Abstracto, Brandon Province. I do think that he is going to be a great guest to have on the show next episode. Fact, I feel like my plan right now is to bank a bunch of episodes and then release like a group of them all together, so there's a lot of content to listen to. If I end up doing that, it's probably available for you to listen to right now. If not, my other plan is to release this as sort of like a pilot, then bank a lot of episodes, release like 4 or 5 all at once, and then do it on a weekly basis. So whatever it is, however it happens, like I said, thank you so much for listening. Like, share, tell your friends about it, rip it to an MP3, give it to your mailman, I don't know. Any way that you can help this podcast grow is very much appreciated. You can find me on the internet. I do things on the internet. If you're finding this podcast just out there in the ether, it is currently January 21st, 2021. I am streaming on Twitch Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday during the week, doing various art programming for people to watch. Soon, I don't know if it'll be this week or next week, but very soon, my art schedule is going to be Mondays and Thursdays. I will be drawing some art assets for an RPG show that I will be putting on later this year called Spaceship Zero and the Slave Ship of Despair. It's going to mostly be theater of the mind. And I say mostly theater of the mind, I mean it is not going to have a battle map and like grid based play like my current D&D show is. There's lots of battle maps and grid based combat on that. This isn't going to be that, but I am going to be drawing like pictures of the environments and monsters and things like that and showing people that. So it is, like I say, mostly theater of the mind, but there will be visual enhancements, and I'll be working on that on Mondays and Thursdays on my Twitch channel, which is twitch.tv/Foulsham_art. Mondays and Thursdays I'll be working on that, and then Tuesdays and Fridays, there's a bunch of stuff that goes on, but my standard my standard Tuesday, Friday content is going to be I have 2 books full of DC Comics characters. What I have done over the last week or so is I flip a coin. If it's heads, I pick volume 1. If it's tails, I pick volume 2. And then I go into Roll20 and I roll up a random page number of the pages that are in the book. Obviously minusing, contents pages and, indexes. But like actual pages that have characters on them, and whatever page I land on, that's the art that I do that day. So that's going to be Tuesdays and Fridays. So Monday is Spaceship Zero prep, Tuesday random DC character, Thursday Spaceship Zero, Friday random DC character. I'm also first Tuesday of the month. Most months is Comic Chaos. That is a comic creation event that I do with a group online called the Illustrati. And I hope to get Ethan Brewerton and other members of the Illustrati on this podcast. I've sent a message to Ethan. We're trying to come up with a time. So hopefully he'll be one of these early episodes as well. But he does Comic Chaos with us. That is on a Tuesday. And so because I'm getting the Spaceship Zero stuff done for something that is going to happen, and I have a lot of work for that, I wanted to make sure that those are on days that I don't substitute with anything else. But yeah, so first Tuesday of the month will probably be substituting the DC comic character stream with the Comic Chaos thing. That's where we design characters, write a story, and draw a comic all on stream. It's usually 5 or 6 panel comic. And then on Fridays, first Friday of the month, most months, again, it's not always, but I try on the first Friday of the month to do the first Friday fan night. That's where people who watch the Twitch stream can come in and request drawings from me. I put a 15-minute timer up on the screen, and I draw their requests right there on stream. It's free. I don't, it's my way of giving back to the community that supports me on Twitch, and all that kind of good stuff. The other stuff that I do is I have a Patreon at patreon.com/Foulsham_art. At $1 a month, you get a weekly webcomic and a weekly blog that I write, basically just giving you all a rundown of what projects I'm working on, where I am at the, various stages of the projects and all that kind of stuff. At $5 and up, you get a comic book and a few other things every month. So like on month 1, when you subscribe at $5, you get issue 1 of the Osborne Tales. The second month you get issue 2, so on and so forth, until I run out of comics to give you. I think right now I have 6 separate things, 3 issues of the comic. Then there was a short story about the Osborne Tales, an 8-page short story that's like its own separate thing that you get. There's a 6-page fantasy western comic I did, called The Ballad of Mr Shorty, which is based on the song Mr Shorty by Marty Robbins. And then there is a RPG module set in the multiverse of the Osborne world, because the Osborne world is, like I said, it's based in the D&D lore kind of. So there's like, outer planes and stuff like that that's called the multiverse. This is set within the greater omniverse of the Ozrin Tales. So you guys get to make your own world, your own version of Ozrin, and it is canon given the way that this all works. So I think that's pretty cool. So if and then there's higher tiers on Patreon as well with other rewards, including like I'm pretty sure the highest tier is like I just give you everything. I just give you everything that I have. So if you like spend like $20 for 1 month, I just give you everything that I have, and then you can like fuck off and do whatever you want. Unsubscribe to me, print it out and burn it. I don't know. But the cool thing about Patreon is I can see who has subscribed to me at what tier and for how long. So say you subscribe to me at $5 a month and then decide that you don't want to subscribe to me at $5 a month anymore because you're not getting any benefits out of that tier other than what you would be getting at $1. Feel free to reduce your subscription down to $1 or stop it altogether. And then when I put out another issue of a comic book on Patreon, when you come back, it's not like you start at the bottom again. You pick up where you left off. So because I'm doing comics by myself right now, I don't have anybody to color. I don't have someone helping me write and do the, drawing and inking phase. Sometimes it takes me about, 2.5 months to get an issue of a comic out when I have a script. And right now, like I said at the beginning of this, I am working on finishing out an entire graphic novel right now. So like I have these first 3 issues. I do not plan on starting another issue of this for some time yet, because I am trying to plot out the entire graphic novel series, and I feel like it's going to be 25 or more issues of the comic to do the story the way that I want to do the story. So totally understand if anybody is nice enough that they want to support me on Patreon for a little while and then back off after the content dries up. Totally understand that. But yeah, other than that, I have a link tree again, Foulsham_art. You can find me on Instagram, my Twitter, my website. I do put out, so those Patreon webcomics, they go up on Patreon, and then 3 weeks later, I put them out on my social medias and my website. So if you don't want to follow me at $1 a month, that's also fine. You still get to read the actual comic. You just don't get the blog. And then on my website, foulshamart.com, if you go to foulshamart.com/BTB, that would, Bravo, Tango, Bravo in the, phonetic alphabet. That stands for Beware the Bone Devil. That was October 2020. Some of you may know, if you're in the art community, there's something called Drawtober, Inktober, Arttober. Lots of different names for it, but basically there's these prompt lists, and the idea is that artists draw a picture every single day in October. And what I did was the last week of September, I wrote a story with my chat on Twitch, and throughout October I drew a 22-page comic. If you go to foulshamart.com/BTB, you can find that PDF download for free. So if you want to see what I can do, what my most recent comic was, you can find that on my website. You can also find links to my other comics that you can, which are for sale on Indie Planet, both digital download and physical print on demand comics. It is on Indie Planet, I believe it's $3.99 for a print comic plus shipping. But you get like an actual physical comic. It feels just like anything you would pick up on the newsstand. It's the same paperweight and ink printing, everything that you would get from like something at DC or Marvel. It's wonderful quality. I absolutely love working with Kablam Publishing and their storefront, indieplanet.com. Wonderful stuff. And yeah. I know that was a long, rambling outro. But hey, this is the first episode, right? So yeah, like I said, please leave a comment, or review, whatever give it 5 stars or whatever the rating system is on whatever you're watching this or listening to this on. And next episode, we will have our first guest host, Brandon Province, aka Mr. Abstracto. I look forward to that conversation immensely. Like I said, I think he's going to be a great first guest. But until next time, I hope you are well. Have a wonderful week.